want to welcome everyone, and especially our esteemed campfire speaker and visitor, Dr. David Stovall. You're all in for a very big treat. But actually, Curriculum Camp is completely student run. So a great shout out and thank you to all of the Curriculum Theory graduate student collaborative officers and executive team. And I think particularly, as you can see on the screen, Anita Dubrock, Cher Aman, and Jingwen Liu have been working around the clock to make this a beautiful experience for everyone. So I'm going to throw it over to them and enjoy all of your work and all of the generative conversations.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Good morning and welcome to Curriculum Camp 2021. My name is Anita Dubrock. I'm a current doctoral candidate in curriculum and instruction here at LSU, and I am the Curriculum Theory Graduate Collaborative President. And this is my fourth and final Curriculum Camp. What makes Curriculum Camp unique is it's completely planned by graduate students for graduate students, although we have a wonderful team of faculty members helping us along the way. I would like to thank them along with fellow grad assistants Cher Ahmad and Jingwen Liu, as well as our executive board who were up late last night in the WhatsApp chat, busily ironing out plans for this morning and for this weekend. We're excited that this year, though in a virtual format, that so many scholars, faculty, and alumni are taking part in this beloved tradition. We have 55 panelists and 117 attendees this year. We're thrilled to learn from you, and we are honored to have Dr. Dave Stovall as our guest speaker for this year's camp, and we're eager to learn from him as his research is so relevant to this period of time. Now I'd like to welcome Jingwen Liu, who is going to take it from here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jingwen Liu. I am a first-year PhD student in LSU, and my major is curriculum and instruction. And now I serve on the executive board of the Curriculum Theory Graduate Student Collaborative. This collaborative is a part of the LSU Curriculum Theory project. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Matthews, who currently serves as the director of the School of Education. Dr. Matthews has been a motivational professor since 1982. His research and scholarly interests include higher education administration, teacher education, and the educational psychology of gifted and talented students. He writes about a number of issues affecting higher education and campus life in the university community. Dr. Matthews is committed to strengthening higher education's fundamental capacities to engage diverse and inclusive populations in the process of being a community of learners and problem solvers. So we thank Dr. Matthews for his support and commitment to us as students and to Curriculum Camp. Dr. Matthews will now take it from here.
Very good, thank you. And thank you, Jingwen, for your introduction, and Anita and Shar for your absolutely spectacular leadership. You make everyone else proud that's gone before you, that's led this curriculum camp. I just want to bring official greetings and a few words about Curriculum Camp and the Curriculum Theory Project. The way I know, because I may be the only one here in this meeting and today that can remember, you know, when we first got started. And I'm going to give you just a little bit of history, my interpretation of the history. But I want to greet everyone that's from far and near. I think I went through 32 separate programs. I was absolutely amazed at where all of you are from. So I want to welcome all of you to the 2021 LSU Curriculum Camp, both far and near. In the past, I would have you turn to your left or turn to your right and shake the hands of whoever's sitting next to you. You don't know, they may have been from Bunkie or Bogalusa or Oshkosh, Wisconsin, but in this particular case, we're from all over and we're virtual, so just welcome all of you. I'm delighted. If you're new to Curriculum Camp or you're new to visiting Louisiana State University virtually, then I'll tell you, you missed out on a couple of things last week. One, you missed out on our winter, 1 week of winter where it scared half of our population in Baton Rouge because it got close to 20 or slightly, I think 20 degrees. And you also missed out on Mardi Gras last week. Even worse news is we all missed out on Mardi Gras last week. And that was just a major problem because many of us see old friends and have Mardi Gras celebrations together, and that was sadly missed this year. However, there's good news that I discovered yesterday. I happened to be in a local food store, and they still had king cake left. Can you imagine? King cake still left over from Mardi Gras, and better yet, they were on sale. Now, I took a look at the king cake, and I would say they looked a little stale, but they were on sale for $1. So it's probably not too late if you're still interested in getting king cake, that you could order a king cake with you. Anyway, for those of you that are presenters, members of the graduate student collaborative who organize this, I have to congratulate you and thank you. You're in for a real treat. The presentation of your papers in front of your peers and the wonderful dialogue that takes place is something that's a treat every year for everyone that attends it. Writing down your thoughts, talking to colleagues, trying out your ideas, it doesn't get any better than that. So again, I want to just mention how this got started. I like to refer to the two professors who came here after I'd been here about a decade. As Yin-Wen said, I call it the Bill Dahl, Bill Pynar comet that blazed through here back in the early 90s. Bill Pynar came here as a department chair of our curriculum instruction, and shortly thereafter hired Bill Dahl. Bill Dahl said to me, really early in the 90s, gosh, we need a curriculum camp, like a good old fireside chat about what curriculum means. And I'd like to take a few minutes just to pay tribute to his founding of this curriculum camp and what it's meant. And also to the co-founder, as a co-founder of the Curriculum Theory Project, along with Dr. Pynar. Dr. Dahl had back in, and if any of you don't know, he passed in 2017. We dearly miss him, those that knew him quite well. He had a desire to advance curriculum theory, and he thought the best way to do this is to make sure the next generation of scholars and doctoral students and others understand how important curriculum is. Now, many of us have come through the traditional teacher education programs, and a lot of us are sort of caught up in the old silo of it's all about teaching, teaching strategies, teaching this, teaching that. And Bill said, Neil, it's not just about teaching. What are you teaching, and why are you teaching that, and what effect does it have? And is it an inclusive, is it an inclusive curriculum? So in reality, what we ended up doing was we talked about a curriculum camp for maybe a year or so. And he said it'll be an informal means of sharing research and ideas between faculty and students. And what I found about Bill is he was an internal optimist. I don't know that I've ever met somebody who always understood what optimism meant and how far it could take you if you just tend to look at the bright side of everything. He was also what I call a highly creative individual. So there was never a problem that Bill didn't bring into my office that there wasn't a workaround. He said, Neil, it's just a matter of time till we figure out a way to solve this. So let's get busy and figure out what it is. So he believed that there were goals that could be accomplished. He had a he knew there could be a pathway to reaching the desired end. Thus, my experience with Bill Dahl was, first of all, he believed in himself and everyone else who came into his orbit. I don't think Bill Dahl ever knew a graduate student who couldn't succeed. I mean, he just took this attitude that everyone can be successful. You just have to figure out what it is. He believed in the power of education to literally transform a life. He lived that. He believed in the power of education and understanding that curriculum filled in the gaps of so many holes in education, holes that were missing from, you know, what we should be teaching students, how it could be successful. He believed in the power of teaching as a powerful force in changing one's own life. So I considered an absolute pleasure to have known him over many years. He always left me with a new insight, a workaround solution, as I said. Bill knew the meaning of civility. He knew and practiced it in every conversation I ever had with him. We need probably more Bill Dahls today, and every one of us that knew him miss him terribly. He was really a great educator and a teacher, and as a result, left us with a legacy. Here we are in 2021 with, what was there? I think I wrote it down, 55 different participants, 117. I missed that part of it. I didn't write the rest of it, but this is great. This is just terrific. So we started this talking 29 years ago was when I recorded it as part of showcasing the intellectual work of graduate students engaged in research on a host of subjects, ranging from the fertile thoughts that drive curriculum theory to the significance of understanding the thinking behind chaos and complexity. Whoever knew, you know, Bill Dahl introduced that idea that curriculum can be chaos, there's complexity, it's interactive. Now, in behind the gates of a university where many of you, where all of us work and live and strive, this is what we do. This is our work. We toil away in what I call the minefields of discovery and exploration, and at times experience sheer terror for how little we know, or better yet, how far we have to go to understand one another, how we learn, how we advance, and how we make a difference in all of these basic beliefs. Curriculum studies, I've found over many years, can either unite us or divide us, depending on where in the spectrum of understanding we reside with our own experiences in school and within our own academic disciplines. I've tried to think of analogies. I sometimes think in analogies, and I've often thought the wonderful story of a computer. There were a couple of individuals from the Seattle area that approached IBM about selling them the software that drives the IBM computer at the time. And the conclusion was, no, we're interested in just selling the box, the computer, is what the IBM official said. Well, Bill Gates and some others understood very well the power of developing the language that drives the thinking, and the programming was what was really important in the box. And I often think of sort of curriculum as that part of the box. Many of us are interested in the classroom, the setup, the teaching, everything about the students, the analysis, but we forget that the heart of a classroom is really what you teach students, the curriculum. So curriculum studies, as I said, can either unite us or divide us. Great, great tradition on most university campuses of having what I call wonderful curriculum wars. We talk about general education and studies that we do. So I'm pleased to be a part of at least bringing to you and encouraging you to celebrate today in a great tradition that we've started here at the School of Education of asking, what is curriculum and why do we have a curriculum and where is it located and how do we know what we know and who determines all of this? Now, I'm involved in a lot of teacher preparation discussion, and I recently did a study along with a couple other colleagues and found that in the teacher preparation curriculum issues that Louisiana over the last decade has had something like 502 what we call policy shifts in how we should train teachers. And I'm now more convinced than ever that the heart of curriculum doesn't just beat in the Louisiana Department of Education, but that we all own a piece of this curriculum. These questions asked by faculty and our graduate students here in the curriculum theory area are really at a heart of what we were trying to discover as what should be is our curriculum for teacher preparation. The project for Curriculum Camp evolved, and then we got started on a curriculum theory project, and that's a discussion by itself. Normally at most universities, they use institutes or research centers. And so we fiddled with those words for quite a while. And we finally came to the idea that it shouldn't be either a research institute, that we should call it a project. Well, you say, why a project? After all, centers and institutes often get cut because they're legitimized by the institution. They get reviewed every 3 to 5 years. There's X number of dollars that are supposed to be brought to these research institutes. So Bill says, why don't we use project, a curriculum theory project? It's ongoing. It's always changing. It may or may not be a money generator for the university. The work of a project is never finished. Rigor mortis cannot set in to a project that's always organic and evolving and moving and revitalizing itself. So we decided on a project, and of course today's Curriculum Camp is a natural outgrowth, an evolution of this. So the project eventually turned out to what I consider to be an absolutely brilliant idea. And not only is it a brilliant idea, but here at the LSU campus, it's like a lot of our live oak trees. It has very, very deep roots that go into the South Louisiana soil. And it's been here now for the better part of 27, 28, 29 years from the discussion and inception of this till now. We also know that trail maps are never needed here in Louisiana when it comes to school reform. We will try anything, even if it means sacrificing our children for a few years in questionable schools and practices and policies. So for curriculum and the discussion of curriculum to be a part of what we consider our school reform movements in Louisiana is absolutely at the heart of why this is a great place for this project to have taken root. So I just want to finish by again thanking all of the current graduate students who are part of this, all of the faculty members and professors who have been a part of the curriculum theory project. I'm absolutely so delighted that Dr. Molly Quinn, back about 1.5 years ago, began to have some serious discussions about coming to LSU. We're delighted she's here. I want to thank all the, if anyone's out here in the screens that's been a past co-chair of the curriculum theory project or any of the faculty members. The Bill Pine are, as I call it, a comet that blazed through LSU some 29 years ago, has left a wonderful trail of research and writing through their books and presentations and articles and essays, and above all, the graduate students that have made this an absolutely essential part of our School of Education. Those of us in the LSU School of Education are very, very proud of the intellectual work and the achievement of the Curriculum Theory Project and its accomplishments. Our own language and our own thinking in our own areas have been changed. Now, some of us have been here more than a few years, can testify to all the changes brought about because of the outstanding faculty and students. And I want to welcome home any of you out here in the virtual screen that I'm looking at that haven't been back. We're delighted to have you a part of it. And as I keep reminding myself, most weeks, Neil, this is not just about teaching. This is about the curriculum. That's at the heartbeat of what we do, whether it's teacher preparation, whether it's special education, early childhood, whatever it is. This is the equivalent of Microsoft software that drives the rest of the classroom teaching. And that's the analogy that I often use that helps me understand just how absolutely important this is. So for today, I wish all of you well, happy camping. I welcome you. I'm particularly excited that Dr. David Stovall from the University of Illinois at Chicago is going to be joining you. You are in for a very, very special treat. I congratulated Dr. Stovall earlier as I read some of his background for being recognized by the American Education Research Association as an awardee for their Social Justice for Education Award in 2020. So welcome all. I'm delighted to be a part of greeting you to and welcoming you to LSU. So thank you. I'll pitch this back to probably Anita. Is that right, Anita?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inspiring us, Dr. Matthews, and for welcoming us to camp. So Dr. Quinn, I believe you are introducing Dr. Stovall to our mentoring session, correct? Dr. Quinn?
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
I wasn't quite sure I was going to, and I'm sure Dr. David Stovall will have a more proper introduction tomorrow night at the lecture by our dean. You've read about his work. He's a professor in African American Studies. Let me get it right, Dr. Stovall, and Criminology, Law and Justice at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and engages deliciously in critical race theory and has been awarded for such, as has mentioned, not just for his work at the university, but incredibly manages to bring those passions into communities, connect people, change the world for justice and equity through his scholarship, which is quite a feat. You know, sometimes it's hard for people to engage their scholarship in ways that meaningfully on the ground really change the lives of students. He was part of founding a school for social justice, the Greater Lawndale Little Village School for Social Justice in Chicago, and has been involved in the People's Education Movement as well, which is just a very exciting collection of teachers and community members and students and professors in Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco who engage in collaborative community projects, really seeking to do what Neil, kind of Dr. Matthews had mentioned, cultivate and create curriculum collaboratively that really is relevant and that really enhances the lives of the people who are engaging in them and transforms them. So I could talk on and on about Dr. David Stovall, but I know you're here to hear him. Author of many important texts and articles as well. Most recently in one of our classes, David, we read your work that you had contributed to critical race methodologies. And so as young scholars, I know you're all interested also in thinking about the theories, but also the methodologies by which you can kind of connect the theory to engage in the work that you want to do. And David's been doing some of that as well. David, we're so happy to have you here. And we promise we'll bring you back when there is Mardi Gras and there is some local dear face-to-face, whether masked or not, time together. But thank you for being here. And this session is a mentoring one that I'm to understand maybe a bit of Q&A. So it's your time to hear from someone very genuine, very real, very accomplished, who can share his journey as a scholar with you and give you some guideposts for the way, I think. So I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Stovall. Thanks so much again.
Definitely. Thanks so much, everybody. Good to see folks. And again, let me thank the Curriculum Camp Committee out loud in terms of Anita Dubrock, Sher Ahmed, Molly Quinn, Jingwen Liu, Jacqueline Bach, and Cindy Ashley, because they actually got in contact with me over a year ago to be a part of this. So I really want to commend you all for being consistent and making sure that I had what I needed. I also want to say to everyone that I hope that you all are maintaining in actually 3 pandemics, right? Because we understand the COVID moment as being one, but we never put in conversation with it the 2 other pandemics of white supremacy and capitalism. And when we talk about those particular issues, remember, a pandemic is only a problem across region or nation. So now when we think about that in real time, those 3 pandemics are showing us not only where we are, but the intensity and totality of the situation. I'm coming to you all from Chicago, also known as the land of the trial of 3 fires, or as the Potawatomi folks named it, the stinking onion. And there is an important piece around being from Chicago and in Chicago. And I also understand that in my acknowledgement of the Council of 3 Fires, that I am still a visitor on land that is still stolen and have been wrongly appropriated and renamed. So it is a position that I take as someone who is coming from Chicago, but also understanding how Chicago has come to be. And it's important as I put that forward to you all, because I want to do a couple of things today that are a little bit different. I know there's 42 of us here on the call, but what I want to do is talk less and let you all just kind of hit me up with questions on the chat, because what it allows me to do is see where folks are coming from and then allowing you that opportunity to kind of engage from a number of different spaces. And you know, you all as grad students in this, and I would really love to be in community with you all face to face, but this is what we have in this particular moment. But there's a thing that I think is important to recognize as a faculty member in terms of taking into account what you all are experiencing as graduate students, right? So I finished up my PhD in 2001. So this is year 21 for me being in a faculty position. And just like when I talk to young folks, I understand that the conditions have intensified in particular ways. So what I hope to do and what I try to do in my own work is never start a conversation with back in my day, right? Because what that does is appropriate me to a lie first, right? Because how we use that to lie to you, to try to admonish you. But what we can say is that we're in a space where the situation has intensified, and we need to pay attention to how those situations have intensified and who has been affected because of that intensification. So when we talk about it in that way, it's reflective of how we are understanding our world. And I really appreciate being at a curriculum camp, because the thing that's often missing is our conversation of Carrere, right? So I'm a student of Bill Ayers, Bill Schubert, and Bill Watkins, right? So they always talk about, this Carrere, or the path, right? So what is this path that we're engaging? And then for you all as graduate students, and I'm seeing you all just having to think and having this real conversation around, after your first year or after your first semester, some of you may have just been like, look, to hell with this, right? This is what are we doing right now, right? And I often reference it as your fuck grad school moment, right? And if you haven't had that, I'm going to question your humanity, right? Because this is what happens in a space. I mean, you think about it. You get dropped in a space, you get dropped with theories that are really difficult to put into action, and then no one wants to talk about how to get them to action, and then you get left with the bogus question, right? So this thing around being straight up about that, right? I remember one of my first graduate classes was a class on aesthetics. And I was just like, man, come on, you got to be kidding me, right? What is happening right now, right? Like somebody is about to catch a mouth shot, right? Like for real, this is grad school right now. I remember calling home and talking to a couple of homies and just being like, look, this just ain't the way, man. I am done with this. And I got lucky enough to be in a class with Larry Parker, and Larry Parker, critical race theorist, who said, and you know, one of the first tenets of critical race theory is racism is endemic to life in the United States. So I sat for a second and said, man, come on, man. I come all the way to grad school, and in my first class, I get hit with racism is real. No shit, homie. What are we going to do, right? So, to his credit, he said, that is exactly the question you should be asking. Why would it take you to come to a class post-undergraduate to be affirmed of what you already know and live, right? And then he said, now, what is the responsibility of putting that out into the world and also being in community with others who also live this, right? So critical race theory is really this call to work. If we know these things to be real, what are we willing to do, right? And what does it mean to talk about this in a way that is palpable and accessible, right? Because, you know, we can go on, we can pontificate, and that's the thing about academia, right? Folks can pontificate until the world is done. But the issue is, what does this mean in real time for the folks that you care about? And again, it's a question that I've been asking for the last 30 years of working with young folks and families. And let me throw an apology out there first. My English is limited, right? So I curse a lot. So that comes out in particular ways. And it's always me trying to press myself around, what is it that we're trying to do here? And then who are we trying to do it with? What is the opposition? And now what are we willing to do given those particular barriers, right? And it always comes into my space. And, you know, I've been down to LSU a couple of times, but when I was in a college of education, it was always this weird thing that the College of Education was fearful of young people, right? You would be in these spaces, young folks show up in the hallway and everybody's paranoid. Who are they? Where are they going? What are they? And then they come to my office. Are they with you, Stovall? Right? And my response was always, yep, right? Just to put people in that mode of saying, look, if we are serious about this, then we have to understand a particular legacy, right? And the legacy of white supremacy in education is not something that white supremacy came to education secondarily. We have to understand schooling in the United States is a racial project, right? And when we come to grips with that, now we can think about our work very differently, right? Remember, it was, and I'm making a very clear distinction between school and education. Schooling is this order and compliance. It is what you are expected to do as some random qualifications scripted by the state. Education is going to call that into question. And when you call it into question, you may have to make a decision whether or not to destroy that thing that is limiting the capacities of people to engage and change their condition. Now, this is, and I'll talk about a little bit more about this tomorrow, but I make this distinction because when I go back to folks like Bill Pienaar, Bill Watkins, James Anderson, Vanessa Siddle Walker, Gloria Ladson-Billings, Danny Solorzano, these are folks who make this distinction. And I really like Kevin Kumashiro's framing. He says, look, he borrows it from Joel Spring. He says, look, the US education system, or the US schooling system, was never intended to educate anyone, right? It was only this project. Education was only the project for the ruling class, right? And that ruling class at that time being white, wealthy landowners. And now what we have seen is a derivative of all those spaces, right? This broader project of white supremacy. So this question, and I think Vanessa Siddle Walker asked it excellently. We are not educated because of a school system. We are often educated in spite of it, right? So now, if anybody was a classroom teacher, you have these days where you're kind of saying to yourself, this is some bullshit. What is happening right now, right? The state has just asked me to just do something that makes absolutely no sense. And I know that this is going to put my students in positions that are going to be worse off. So what am I going to do? And now you got groups of people who are saying, yeah, that's exactly right. And we're willing to break that mold. So what does it mean to break? And as a good friend of mine, Patrick Camignon, always says, what does it mean to commit to break free from your oppression? What does it mean to engage in a space that says, I will no longer engage in the spirit murder of young people, right? As Bettina Love frames using Patricia Williams' work, right? So when we think about this in real time, and you all as graduate students, there are two questions that I always put to you all. You have to think about these two things when you are engaging your work. Why and for what, right? And those are questions that you are not answering to your advisor, you are not answering to your committee, you are answering those questions to yourself. Why and for what, right? Because if you want to be researcher of the world, then, getting your award for being researcher of the world, right? Sometimes the AERA awards can feel like that. You go to this kind of really strange ceremony and then they give you this thing and it's just like, now welcome the world's greatest researchers. And you're just like, man, what is this? And so beyond that, if it's around personal gain, then I'm going to ask you to not make a claim towards justice. You do not do justice work. Right? If it's about your own personal validation, you're in the wrong space. If you are serious about justice, right? So this thing around it's not about being dogmatic, but I want to be clear around these false claims that we see people making. And I'm by no stretch of the imagination am I the purveyor or gatekeeper of all things justice. But I do want to speak to the things that have come out that have actually harmed folks in opposed to engaging them, right? So that goes all the way from corporate charter schools, all the way to testing regimens, all the way to thinking about, why we even engage people and the exclusion of folks from curriculum, right? So now, if we understand that we are in this racial project, what is the justice condition? And more importantly, who determines it? So for me, it was always around being in conversation with people who do not care that I have a PhD, right? I would challenge anybody to go in front of a group of 9th graders and say, hey, I'm Dave, I got a PhD. and their initial response was, man, that's real good for you, homie, but that does not work here, right? That is just not going to be, we are not having that conversation, right? And this thing around, why do you do what you do? And not being flustered by those questions, but embracing those questions. Bill Ayers always talks about, what does it mean to engage the contradiction? You are in a space that really wasn't meant to work for a lot of people. Yet people have acted and responded fugitively and made that thing shift into something else. I would encourage folks to look at a conversation between James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni. And it was in the 70s on a program called Soul, and you can YouTube it. It'll the first thing that comes up when you type in conversation between James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni. It's about 2 hours long. It is worth every second, because what they talk about is living in a world where you are constantly reminded of how much you are hated. And then they talk about the demand for joy. They talk about what does it mean to make those things that were not intended for us. And how they refer to it as, what does it mean to make it ours? What does it mean to reclaim, resist, reimagine, and act differently? So now, as a grad student, it's not about the burden, placing that burden on you all, but really having us think about what does it mean for us to actually meet your particular needs or address your needs, but also, what are you going to do with this thing when you're done? Right? And Paul, appreciate you for putting that on deck for everybody. So what does that mean, again, to do this work in a way that is unflinching, right? Because as somebody who does critical race theory, I know that as soon as I say the US schooling system is a racialized project, then I'm going to get the opposition. I have to expect the opposition to come. It is never about if they are coming. It is always about when they are coming. Because as soon as they say it, they're already gearing up, right? I've been Zoom bombed. All of these things that have happened in these spaces, that's the expectation. When you are willing to name white supremacy and its form and function and how it permeates what it is that you do, they're going to come, right? But the thing is, now you can't run from that. And as graduate students, one of the main questions becomes, how do you build community in a contradiction, right? Because they tell you, as building this dissertation, that it's a solitary exercise. But for folks who actually do this work differently, we know that our dissertations were communal exercises. If it was not for Carla Lewis, Ty Williams, and Arisfe Esquivel, I would not have finished my dissertation, right? So we actually wrote collectively in terms of exchanging ideas, in terms of looking at ways to understand our world. And now, what are we actually speaking to, right? And who are we speaking with? And always, why and for what? Because those questions, if we are not careful, those questions get lost the quickest, right? If we are not clear about the why and for what, we will go down that rabbit hole of theory, and all we're talking about is epistemology, and you can't even explain what it means, right? I always used to get hella mad. Like, I would come into colleges of education and everybody would be talking about, our pedagogical engagement. And then when you ask somebody what's pedagogy, and then they give you these crazy ass answers. Well, pedagogically speaking, what? Like you giving all this talk, but nobody is willing to say pedagogy, the process by which you engage whatever it is that you're trying to do. And now, even looking at Freddie, who says, look, it's not just the pedagogy, but now how are you reflecting on what it is that you're doing to improve conditions, right? So this thing around, when we understand justice, and justice meaning that the justice condition is only determined by the people who are experiencing the injustice, then our work shifts. How we speak about it shifts, how we articulate it shifts, who we're in conversation with shifts. So now it's really around positioning yourself as someone who is willing to challenge the orthodoxy, because the orthodoxy has not done right by the people who have experienced the injustice, right? And when we think about this in real time, you will need those and those like you to affirm your sanity, right? I take that message from a prophet I had by the name of Ralph Page, who was a philosopher. And he said, look, if you're gonna do this work, you have to be clear that you cannot do it by yourself. And your capacity to build community will be the affirmation of your sanity, because the powers that be will say that you are not sane. So now, what does it mean to engage in self-care that is not indulgent, but self-care that is collective? So when Black queer radical feminists have reminded us of the necessity of this, like Barbara Smith, Audre Lorde, Saidiya Hartman, they are telling us that in order to do justice work, we must take care of ourselves, because if we do not, our time here gets shortened, right? And shortened unnecessarily. So now, if we live in that understanding, our work is reflective of it. It does not turn away from it, but it turns toward it, right? And it turns toward it in a way that, again, is connected to something. It's not just you standing against the powers that be, but you are standing in community with folks, understanding that your articulation is connected to something, right? And it's connected to something that you actually believe in, because you have answered the question, why and for what, right? And don't worry about that question shifting, right? The answer shifting, because they may shift given the time and place. So for me, the why right now is because if we do not do it, then the false narrative of Black inferiority remains. And then for what is the folks who are just like me, who are seeing this, living this, and are working to change it. Now, how do I join forces with them? What is my responsibility and accountability to them? How do I interrupt the colonial, white supremacist, imperialist nature of traditional research that has extracted and exploited our communities? And how am I painfully intentional about that? Huh? Now, I apologize. I probably talked a little bit too long, because I really want to entertain you all's inquiries in the time that we have left. So I just wanted to talk briefly to kind of situate ourselves, but I also wanted to show some solidarity, because I know we are all going through it, and these are real times, and they're real situations that are pressing us in ways that many of us know very well, and some of us have not experienced just yet. So I just want to be responsible to that, but again, entertaining questions or what have you. And because it's a lot of us, let's just go ahead and drop them in the chat, and then I can just kind of go into answers that or ways that I've been thinking about it, and what I've been trying to do communally to address some of those concerns. And no question is a bad question, but I really want to make sure that there's time for that, because when we don't, I want to prioritize you all's time and engagement.
So feel free to drop questions in the chat.
And Megan, thanks for that confirmation, right? You know, some days you just in class like, man, what is happening right now? And it has nothing to do with your students, right? It's all you. Just like, what are they asking me to do right now? Yeah. So just really understanding that is not, when you ask that question, you are claiming your humanity.
I think I should start it. Others are thinking about the questions.
Yeah, no problem, Kelly. If you want to talk, so yeah, not a problem. Go ahead.
So actually, my question is, as you said that as a graduate students, how we should be looking ourselves in academia in a professional way. I'm talking about the career I'm looking at if I want to be an assistant professor. Mm-hmm. I'm just taking the part of it, the justice part of it, a little bit out of it, but the career part of it, that given the circumstances of the COVID, which has changed the new normal totally. So we are sure that once the COVID would be over, there will not be the same normal settings of schooling and education, particularly in the higher education, which has almost all gone online and hybrid. Given this type of situation, there will be less chances of the job for people who are graduating this year and next year. Then those were the opportunities for those people who had been in the past years. So what would you suggest those graduate students who are going to graduate this year to look forward, and how should they prepare themselves for future? I mean, I'm talking about just particularly in the perspective of jobs. How should they look at it?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for that share. I think there's a couple of things, and it's important. One of the parts of the radical imaginary is to understand the world as it is, right? And then now the work that we do moving forward, because we understand the world as it is. And we're seeing quite a bit of shifts in terms of what the COVID moment has brought to colleges and universities. I think it's a time for folks who are coming out in the next couple of years to get even clearer about what it is that you are doing, because now that clarity allows for search committees or what have you to see what's the connection to the particular position. Now, when I say this, when I write this, or I'm saying when I say this, it becomes important that you think about your work in its relationship to the position that's advertised, and not you trying to fit your work into that particular position, right? And that sounds like it's very like a small in terms, it sounds small in terms of that adjustment, but it's an important one, because a lot of times when people apply for positions, and even when they get to talks, they will do this thing where they try to fit their work into what the job announcement is. And that's actually not a good move in a talk. A better situation is to say, okay, here's my work, and here's how I understand it in relationship to what is being asked in this particular announcement, right? So it requires this, I think this COVID moment requires us to go deep, right? It's not just these kind of blanket situations where you can just kind of fill stuff out and think folks are gonna give you a callback. It's really around how are you articulating your understanding of that place. So it requires us to do some groundwork around those places that we're interested in going, and now being able to connect what they have happening locally to the things that you're engaged with. Because what it does, it lets folks know that you're serious about the space, and it also allows you to practice what does it mean to think about your work in relationship to what's happening at that particular institution. But it's important, again, to, in late stage capitalism, there are all these shifts, and that is one of the shifts that is important to pay attention to. Because I think the other thing, and even with this shift in late stage capitalism, it becomes critically important for you to ask a question about the spaces that you're applying to, whether or not that is a place where you can do your work. So if they call you in, you have to be just as prepared to ask those questions about whether or not this is a space to do the type of work that you set out to do, right? But thank you for that. And I see everybody's questions, thanks. So Megan Villa and Melissa Sadler-Nitu, I'm gonna go to Kelly real quick because she actually hit me up too. So I'm gonna go Kelly, Megan Villa, and then Melissa Sadler-Nitu. So go ahead, Kelly.
All right, thank you. Yes, and hi everyone. So I'm not a graduate student yet. I'm coming in the fall 2021. So, but I decided to jump in early. So I'm really curious about, what you were just talking about in this idea of make sure that your work fits the institution. And you also gave a great shout out to Audre Lorde, so I want to go into that, where she talks about you can't destroy the master's house by using the master's tools.
Right.
This is something I fight with a ton. So I teach at Tulane and also at Bartley College, New Orleans. And so Tulane, you know, this is changing and transitioning. Bartley College, it's already there because it's built on all of these premises. But what ends up happening is the students then have to confront the fact of, I'm still tested on grammar, right? And we talk about how, you know, this is all, we talk about, you know, this is all about colonialism. This is all about, you know, this oppression that's taking place. And so the difficulty and the question I have is, so taking that and extrapolating to not even how you work for the institution, but the larger institution of when we use this specific language, for example, it reinforces the things we're trying to undo. And so therefore, how to address that with not pushing the students back, giving them the tools that they can succeed, but going beyond just criticism. I don't know if you had read any theory or concepts about how do we actually change the curriculum in that regard when everything we're taught from when we're born and it's pressed on everybody reinforces these ideals that we're trying to fight against.
Well, I mean, it's an important piece, and this is a lot of times when people do the work of discourse analysis, right? So when people are actually talking about the ways in which we are thinking about because our articulation is really around how well we regurgitate the practices of Western Enlightenment Europe, right? We have to just kind of be straight up about that. So when we're actually intentional about that and why it's a racial project, now we have to say, okay, well, what does it mean curricularly? So curricularly and pedagogically, what does it mean to articulate what it is that you're trying to say to an audience who may not understand the condition, right? And using that as the bar, right? So now it's no longer around how well we demonstrate our capitulation to Western Enlightenment Europe. It's really around how are we articulating this thing to get the word out to folks who may not know what's happening, right? And I think that's always how Audre Lorde, Barbara Smith, and now folks like Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, they always write like that. And it's clear, and I want to shout a woman who may not be as well known, but we should pay attention to, a woman by the name of Crystal Laura, who says always, there is no substitution for plain and simple conversation. When we put that on the page, there is no substitution for it, right? Even if we are talking about complex issues, how do we set forward the layers that we are in conversation with and what those layers are connected to, right? So we have to break free from, as Denise Taliaferro says, we have to break free from the project of rationality, right? So we have to really think about what does it mean to now, instead of going back to whether or not you can pontificate, but really what is the justice condition in articulating what it is that you know, right? Because the university is not a justice project. We need to be clear about that. Now, you can make space for folks to engage a justice condition. You must understand that that is not because of the university, but that is largely in spite of it, right? But you can always create fugitive spaces. But thank you for that, Kelly. So Megan, via you spoke before about asking when opposition will happen instead of if. How can we as graduate students with various backgrounds be prepared for the opposition of the justice we wish to serve? And this is always the important piece, because you don't want to give a bunch of time to the opposition, but you want to understand how they operate, right? So a good friend of mine always talks about a trilingualism, right? So this thing is what it is that you know, what your opposition says about what you know, and then what are you trying to do given those two things, right? So always thinking about, so that opposition is already ready, right? So now, in opposed to dedicating a lot of time to it, you do need to understand how they will attack because so you won't be blindsided, right? So some of that, unfortunately, is reading a lot of stuff that makes you sick to your stomach, right? Vijay Prashad always talks about this, and I love his quote. He would always say, he's like, look, I read a lot of this trash, so you don't have to, right? So he would always, that's how he would always engage his class. He was like, look, man, I know it's trash, but we have to know why it's trash. So when they come for you, you're not blindsided by the argument, right? And this is the other thing. And I think this is important to your question, Megan. We cannot expect collegiality when we are talking about justice, right? Because many folks are going to assume an attack, right? So when I say the words white supremacy, racial project, some people get in their feelings about that, right? And they can't get to the practice of understanding what it is that I'm saying and why we need to live in recognition of it. So this process is really around not being afraid of that, but knowing when they come. And then actually studying some folks who handled opposition in real time very well. So if you look at a lot of Malcolm X interviews, the way he handled the media was just, it was clear, right? Also, look at the work of Ella Baker, right? Ella Baker was very clear around her positionality and what it was that she was trying to do, right? And her articulation was very succinct, right? And then I'm going back to James Baldwin, and you can check out this interview, this conversation between him and William F. Buckley. And he is just giving Buckley the business, right? It's 45 minutes of him handling William F. Buckley. And actually, him and Margaret Mead wrote a piece together that isn't given a lot of pub these days, but it's called The Rap on Race. And I always remember part of the conversation where he tells Margaret Mead, he says, look, I don't have a problem with anthropology, but what I have a problem with is when you talk about folks who look like me, I feel like you're talking about monkeys, right? And I was just like, damn, there it is, right? This thing around really thinking about the ways in which to think about this. And when you do not expect collegiality, the other thing is trust and allyship is only proven in material terms. What do I mean by that? Colleges and universities, especially with profs, talk is cheap. People talk about a ton of shit and don't do a damn thing. So now, who are the people who follow up with whatever it is they are saying to you? And those are the allies. Those are the people that you build community with. That is quintessential to any type of justice work moving forward, right? So I think that becomes important. And Melissa, your question, if we're using our research to make change, how do you agree or advocate for social justice to make people hear you? For example, in the political realm, the object is to shut you down by making my voice silent. How do you turn that around to be heard outside of academia? Again, what does it mean to make your work accessible, right? And also to think about this. Research is secondary to the justice condition on the ground. What do I mean by that? The research should never take the lead in any justice project. The research is always in response to communities who have identified a particular issue. I'll give you all an example around this. Where you all are, well, not everybody, but where a lot of you all are in Baton Rouge, there's a place not too far from you that's referred to as Cancer Row. And Cancer Row is where a bunch of petroleum distribution centers are. And in that space, you have one of the highest rates of cancer in the world. And it's it's referred to as generational cancer, right? Because there are groupings of people who have lived in these towns who now have contracted cancer. And it's not by way of being a hereditary form, but it's actually the combination of stress and being exposed to toxins. The researchers noticed this because families were actually protesting and pushing it back against the petroleum companies. So the research is supporting their work, right? Because I don't want you all to go into communities, hey, I'm a researcher, I know what you all need. The first response is, please don't, right? That's the worst thing you can do. But now what we have to be doing is listening to folks and now saying, upon listening to folks, here's what we need to pay attention to. And when you talking about this outside of academia, that's when it becomes important. Your clarity on how to articulate your points to multiple groupings is key. Because now when you're talking to non-research communities, you're not talking about whether or not you did a regression or if you used some system or now you're using GIS, right? That doesn't matter to folks who are going through this or folks who are trying to figure out what to do about it. What you can say is, when we look at this issue over time, here are the things that become critically important for us to pay attention to. And these things have resulted in the detriment of particular families, right? And I learned that by being in community with folks, right? So it's not about trying to speak for people, right? I think that's a classic mistake that we make. This is always around speaking with people. This is the broader project of solidarity. You are not speaking for people, right? You are speaking with people because they have articulated an issue and concern that you now are trying to address. I think that becomes critically important, right? And when you know the opposition, that those key points that you hit, and and I don't like to use the terms elevated speeches or what have you, but your clarity will now push on what it is that you are engaging, right? So give you a quick example. So right now here in Chicago, folks are returning back to school, but as a public health concern, what folks have not taken into account is that many of the schools on the south and west sides of Chicago that serve Black and brown students are older buildings that have bad ventilation systems. If young folks get into those particular schools, many of those young people live in generational households. And if they are exposed and they take that back to their household that has potentially older populations, you could see a different type of spread. Now, I got that from a medical researcher. A medical researcher articulated it exactly in that way to the news, to city officials, and to other folks. So that becomes important. So again, we're talking about the ways in which our research allows us to talk to multiple populations when we're thinking about how we do our work, right? And want to make sure, so I got, yep. And then Odette, this, how do graduate students push for real concrete changes in the institutions rather than just accept the performative actions without risking future opportunities? How do we speak truth to power and demand equity in education while trying to get a degree within the same institution that is filled with inequities? Odette, you have highlighted the contradiction, right? So one of the things that's an important pushback that you all can push on universities is to get them out of this conversation around what they need to articulate diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it's become a trope, right? You got a DEI officer that's become the lo-fi vice provost of the fax machine, right? So this thing around nobody knows what the hell they do, and then when it comes out, they end up doing some program that's not even connected to your needs, right? So now it's really around thinking about accountability, right? And something real simple, right? People talk about they're increasing their population of Latinx professors. You can't be hiring folks from Spain claiming that they're Latinx people. Quit playing, right? Like you always see this, and I'm saying, like, what, this rando Spaniard is being hired, and now this is your commitment to diversity. You say this, and no hatred from folks from Spain. A couple of close homies are from there, but we have to see how this is being used in particular ways. And another thing that you all could push for in terms of cluster hiring, because this is another thing that universities do. They hire one person of color who has a radical agenda, and then they say, see, we're committed. What you all can say is, no, we need 3 of them. Right? We need 3 of them. So don't talk to us about whether or not you can find them or not, right? Because that's the other lie. Well, we just can't find them. They just won't come. Now, to what extent have you gone out and got folks, right? And that really becomes important. Over the years, I actually have been recruited to spaces actually by graduate students, right? So this thing around is like, look, if you're serious, you need to bring some folks like this on deck, right? So I think this becomes important, and recognizing what it means to sit in that contradiction. Another thing, it becomes critical for you to understand these experiences, so when you get into those spaces, you do not do the same thing. A lot of your experiences in graduate school is about what not to do, right? And that's going to sound, it kind of sounds counterintuitive, but you see it all the time. Like, you see folks who come through, and I'm going back to Cher's question. You know, you see folks come through and they give their job talk, and you say, man, what was that? Right? Now you know that's a bad look. Other folks who have said they have a particular commitment to other things and then do the exact opposite, you now know that that's not the way to go. Another thing, and this becomes critical, and I really appreciate this question, Odette, because this is about locating the people who do the type of work and who do the work in a responsible way, and really study how they move in this space, right? Because that's not only a survival mechanism, but that's also a justice mechanism. Give you an example. I had a dean when I was in graduate school by the name of Mildred Griggs. Mildred Griggs came to the College of Education and said, look, I'm here for 6 years. After year 6, I'm gone. But while we are here, I refuse to accept any trope that further marginalizes students of color and people who are working in communities to engage the justice condition. That was her opening speech, right? I was like, oh, what? I'm like, man. And my department chair was like, and she's serious about that, right? She's not playing. But again, when you are clear about that, you also have to understand the exit strategy, because she was like, look, I'm here for 6 years. Y'all can figure it out. I'm gone. And if you all are not pleased, please vote your conscience of no confidence, right? I mean, she was just clear about what it means to do work in a particular way, right? And I think that trilingualism comes back, because now you're not just understanding and studying the opposition, but you're getting clearer about what it is that you're trying to do. And then when you see those folks who are navigating this and really bringing about justice, I think it really becomes important. Give you all an example that's right there in you all's backyard. There's a brother I've been working with for the last about 5-6 years named Roland Mitchell. Roland Mitchell is clear about what it is that he's trying to do. He doesn't flinch. And what I always appreciate about him is that he says, look, the word and answer to us always is no, but here's what we're going to do, right? So that really becomes important, I think, moving forward, so you can see what it means to really push on the university to do some things that they are claiming to do, but actually don't do. You all have the best seat in determining that particular justice condition and how they should move, right? Here at UIC, a group of grad students clicked up and started a coalition called the Good Trouble Coalition, right? And it's all these formations of graduate students that are working in their various areas to now begin about what the university needs to be doing. And in another space, be willing to learn from defeat, right? Because it's not just taking the L and just saying, oh, that's all we could do, but it's really around saying, I kind of cut off a little bit, but it's really around saying, what does it mean to now take that lesson and move forward to improve our work, right? So it's a different type of thinking and working, but thank you so much for that question. And then Frank, how do we build the collective community at the Academy to use the COVID-19 pandemic to support the reset needed in pre-K-12? And this is, I think, one of the most important things, and full disclosure, I'm on the board of the Abolitionist Teaching Network, organization created by Bettina Love and Brandon Tolston. And there's a really important point, and I get this actually from the folks in disability studies. When we talk about getting things back to normal, a critical perspective would say, well, normal has actually been the problem, right? So this white supremacist racial project of schooling has been normalized. That pre-exists COVID. So now when we think about using this particular moment, there are a couple of things that come up that I think we can really jump on and center on. One is the elimination and suspension of standardized tests, right? So we've seen College Board, ACT, and ACT suspend their testing, right? No young person has died because they cannot take a test, right? And I think it becomes a critically important point to go back to folks like Tukufu Zuberi, who wrote Thicker Than Blood, Stephen Jay Gould, who wrote The Mismeasure of Man, and really start to think about what it means to move in this particular way, and saying the COVID moment has exacerbated what we've known for time immemorial. It has allowed more teachers to see what this condition really is. So now we have an opportunity to begin to engage in a different way, right? Many of us are referring to it as an abolitionist moment of clarity. This idea of you are now able to see what this work is, and now saying we have a moment to reset and rethink. And another thing, really being clear about reform is not enough. It has never been enough. You know, and I take it all the way of saying, you know, look, we got these nice pink bows and we're putting it on a putrid turd and we're calling it change. Enough of that, right? I mean, it's just this thing around now, the COVID moment has allowed us to see what folks have been telling us for time immemorial. And now we have a real opportunity to engage in a particular way. Now, the thing is, what research are you leaning on to really kind of think about this? I would encourage folks to look at the National Educational Policy Center out of the University of Colorado at Boulder. They are a clearinghouse for this type of research. Another space is the Prison Equity Initiative. There is a bunch of work that's coming out that's talking about what this reset means, how to think about decarceration and what that means in daily life. So when we begin to think about this, have no fear of looking outside of your discipline for allies, right? Because a lot of times in a discipline, we confine ourselves. So now, what does it mean to look outside of our space to now think about our work, right? And these things around, now that these things have been brought to light, now you can move in different ways. And looking for those examples of people who have made decisions to move differently, right? So you got a lot of states who are suspending their testing. Illinois just applied for the suspension of all standardized testing. So this thing around thinking about what it means, and I appreciate, Mariah, your point that normal was good for the few, right? But not for all, right? And normal is absolutely the problem, right? And that thing around getting back to normal just means getting back to the broader racial project of schooling, right? And not doing anything different. But again, thank you all for those questions. But again, and hopefully this is making sense, because I know the Zoom moment can, so much can happen in the Zoom moment, but I know you all got a full day in terms of people presenting and the like. I guess the next couple of days, and that this and Mariah, your point around the state of New York, got this in Illinois, California did it. In fact, California did it at the collegiate level. So Cal State and UC have suspended all standardized testing, and there's a push in UC to do it permanently. So these are really important moments to now think about what are these revolutionary practices, abolitionist practices that now allow us more room to do our work with intention. And again, not, being straight up and honest about this, right? It is a lot of work. It is extra work, and it's work that you're going to be challenged on perpetually. That is why it is critically important that you build community, because we will need spaces to lean on each other because this stuff gets tough. I don't want to lie to you all, right? And I want to be painfully honest about what we need. Yep. And so New York got the situation around whether or not they're going to be cut by, so Megan, your point, Mariah, your point around New York got they're telling us the same thing in Illinois, that the DOE might cut our funding, but we got an interesting governor, and he's just kind of like, all right, if that's what it is, that's what it is. Like he's not really flinching on that. And I know Cuomo got a little bit of drama right now, but this thing around, he may have some leeway to do that, especially if other states do it. So it's this real interesting moment, because the DOE is trying to appease to a particular population that says that it should not exist. And that's been a long sorted battle since the 80s around whether or not the US government should have a Department of Education, because education is largely controlled by states. So this is, again, back into that political economy, but understanding that those particular shifts are important. And Aaron, to your point, what's happening in Texas, right? That inequality comes from all directions, even as basic as power. How do we prepare students for facing the inequality without overwhelming them that everything works against them? Thank you for this. This is critically important. We, in all of our work, and one of my perpetual fears, right, is that you all leave today's sessions like, oh shit, Stovall said it's all gonna blow up. Let's just lay it down and go home, right? But that's not it. Now, there's another part of the justice condition. What does it mean to be overcommitted to the spaces that bring us joy over the ones that bring us isolation and marginalization? So in every class, in every place that we engage, we now have to have a space where we express joy. However that's intended. A good friend of mine who I work with in the People's Education Movement, he wrote up our agenda one day, and the agenda, one of the agenda items was joy, right? And I was just like, yes, right? What does it mean to claim that, right? How do we make sure that in every instance we are claiming joy, right? In whatever way that comes, but here's the thing. Joy cannot come at the expense of others. So you feeling good about yourself by demeaning other folks, can't have that. Joy has to come from a commitment to be together, to work, and those ways that we express our love for each other, right? Dare I say the word love, right? So this thing around really doing that, and it's tougher in the COVID moment because there are all these restrictions for real life health concerns. But at the same time, what is this demand for joy, and how are we constantly demonstrating our demand and claim, right? And that's a real piece, because like I said, when you're speaking like this and you talk about this, right, the burden feels heavy. So now we have to be clear around, okay, what are the spaces that we're able to cool out, that we're able to share with each other, that we're able to engage, that we're able to experience each other at a human level. And I think that's a real tough thing. And I say that I'm really thankful, Aaron, for that question, because for many years, I did not, right? My behavior used to be hella toxic, right? I was just like, what you mean love? What? Love, this struggle, right? What the fuck? What? Like, what are we doing, right? Like that thing around operating in that, right? Until I had a health scare of my own, right? Where the doctor was like, look, man, the doctor asked me a question. He said, take me through your day. And I was like, oh, ooh, right? And then when I took him through my day, he said, look, man, it will be a great day in the morning if you make it to 50. And then he said, look, there's some things that you need to do. And you can do them without a rash of medication, but you have to do them, right? And I think, and that was just really kind of eating different, exercising differently, and really thinking about the spaces that bring some joy and harmony, right? And that sounds antithetical to what you all are being trained to do as researchers, but at the same time, it will be the thing to keep you alive, right? And I think that is critically important, right? And Ryan, and I'll make this the last question because I see we're at time. Where does my motivation come from to do this work, especially during times when we're faced with great challenges? Where do I pull from to continue? The collective of people that I'm in community with, right? Those are the folks that propel me. When I see young folks when I see young people and families in the street making particular demands, when I see people who are pushing to do work in a particular way, my question is always, how can I support or join forces with those folks? How can I do it in a way that is accountable, responsible, and with integrity? So that's my motivation to do this work, when I'm seeing folks willing to collectivize and really start to think about the world outside of their individual selves, right? So that's key for me in terms of maintaining motivation to do work in this way, right? But thank you, Rianne, for that question. And I want to be respectful of folks' time. It's 11:31. So Anita Jingwen, Cher, Molly, thank you all so much for even inviting a person like myself to be on deck. And then tomorrow we'll get down again in terms of having another conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stovall. I have 4 pages of notes now. Wait, no, 5. 5 pages of notes now. And so we're going to break for lunch. Our lunch is until about 1 o'clock. So, and everything you need is in this handy, I printed mine because I'm old school. Everything you need is in your program. So if you're coming back for session 1, the Zoom link is in your program. If y'all have any issues, my phone is always with me. And have a good lunch. Have a nap. Go get some sunshine. Drink some water. And thank you, Dr. Stovall, for inspiring us and getting us off to a great start. So I will see y'all after lunch.
Definitely. Thank y'all. Truly appreciate it.
So much.
Thanks, Dr. Stovall.